Today, David and I are taking a deep dive into the Congress and taxation. And it seems that the people who are very much dissatisfied with the Congress in terms of the representation of we the people have little to say about what they do and who influences them. The big question is, how do we the people start to make a difference here in terms of Congress representing us?
Well, that's correct, Ross, and that starts with one particular assumption here, is that we have a broken tax system that is favoring the wealthy. Our Constitution starts with we, the people. Keep this in mind as we discuss today the importance into how we, the people, can influence policies in Washington. My name is Dr. David Oualaalou.
And my name is Dr. Ross Stewart.
And you are watching Geopolitics in Conflict. Well, today, you go first.
Do you know how little say we have in how our tax money is spent or what our tax rate is?
Well, I do know a little bit about how much I'm paying in taxes, but it always makes me wonder, how come taxes, when you look at society, okay, and you see where the majority of society is, and the percentage they are paying. In other words, you look at the top of the pyramid with 1%, the millionaires paying this. You look at the bottom, which with the poor that have nothing to pay, which I understand. Then you look at the majority of the segment of society paying between 28 and 33%. And I always wonder about that. Why?
Well, you know, I saw a really excellent explanation as to how come the wealthy don't pay much. The tax attorneys, the accountants, and their ability to fight endlessly with the IRS about what to pay. So all of a sudden it becomes not worthwhile to pursue it because the cost of enforcing the tax laws is so great. And these high-priced CPAs and so on can find every loophole, every gray area, and the IRS code is loaded with these gray areas. That thing is massive. And as a matter of fact, even the IRS agents, and that's a special thing in the IRS, don't even know all these things.
Well, as a matter of fact, Ross, just for our viewers to know, tax code, there are about 96,000 pages of tax codes. And 98% of those 96,000 pages are written for businesses, which means only the 2% left is for you and I, for the common man. And with those 98% of those taxes towards businesses is what allow the big corporations like the Amazon to pay in taxes last year, zero.
And they were outrageously profitable.
Oh yeah, look at just after the shutdown in March, in May, I think they made $18 billion. And no tax to be paid on it.
Paid just absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
So what we see is, again, those in powerful, moneyed positions get all the benefits. All the rest of us pay for everything else.
And this is one reality that I always used to share with my students, is that I always tell them, what you need to know and understand as you move forward academically and professionally is that American economy, you know who sustained the American economy? Is the middle class. You take the middle class out of the picture, the American economy will sink.
Clearly.
Yeah, and because of those taxes.
And we see things like in Venezuela, where the middle class sank and the whole economy tanked. But who profited in Venezuela? The people at the top.
At the top.
Again. And we take a look at how do we dislodge this, or how do we get a different focus going on? Because The universal acceptance is that Congress isn't representing us well.
No, it's not. And this is why I'm still calling for the need for a term limit. Till you have a term limit, nothing's going to change, because lobbyists know that those members of Congress, they're going to be there for the next 20, 25, or 30 years. So that's how they get to push their agenda, from either tax reductions to corporations or tax reductions to millionaires, because as a matter of fact, millionaires pay only between 14 and 18%, if I'm not mistaken.
I'm telling you, I pay a lot more than that.
And this is something wrong with the tax system. The American tax system is, and I'm going to use the term, broken. But again, you got a dysfunctional Congress that till we put a term limit, this whole notion of you serving for life is just ridiculous.
You know, in terms of taxation, another possibility is have all political campaigns funded by the government so that special interest groups and lobbyists can't come and demand of Congress, well, if you want to get reelected, you play ball with us.
And yes, I see your point. However, there has been a case in 1976 or 1978, if I'm not mistaken, made it to the Supreme Court regarding the financial, how money is viewed in politics. And the decision back then was made that money is considered a form of speech, you know. And fast forward to 2010, decision of the Supreme Court of the Citizens United against versus the Federal Election Commission, you know, in which the Supreme Court made a decision to allow super PAC unlimited donations. And that just opened the door wide.
Well, what about a corporation being considered an individual? Allowed to contribute as an individual rather than a moneyed powerhouse.
That's correct. And this is where you see that the balance is, the whole system is broken. And they need to sort of address it. Yes, we can always be saying, well, it needs to be fixed, it needs to be fixed. But nothing changes on its own till the system changes from within. And this is something majority of Americans think, well, Washington this, Washington that, the president this, the Speaker of the House this and that. All this is nothing but a noise. Because if you don't change the system, nothing's going to change. Regardless who is in White House, regardless who is the Speaker of the House, regardless who is in whatever. That's usually how it works. Till that system is changed. Well, the system, when you look back at the beginning of the United States, who was in charge? The farmers, the landowners, and the bankers. And later on became the slave owners. So basically what we're seeing today is no different than what it was back then. And even James Madison himself warned against this idea of the interest groups. His argument back then was that you do allow interest groups, for example, because in a democracy you're supposed to compete over interests. But the problem with that is this plurality, if you will, because now you're going to have an interest groups that is well-funded, that's going to now serve the upper class.
And it's doing it very well.
Because that's how, and that's right now why our system has been broken for the last few decades. And I personally don't see it changing till we change the system itself.
You know, you have to add how much deficit spending goes on with this in spite of the high tax rates.
Well, it just, I mean, you look at the national debt so far, it reaches about what, $28 trillion. And it's
about
growing.
To go higher.
It's growing because of the printing of money and so forth. But an average citizen, like I remember we said this in one of our shows, an average citizen doesn't think in those terms. An average citizen will have to think about what's for dinner. Do I have anything to eat for dinner tonight or not?
You know, I can't remember the exact number. Maybe you remember it. How many families live paycheck to paycheck with no reserved cash?
Well, there's now an average that there's only about $400 in somebody's account in the bank. And even with this one, Ross, is about to change once the Federal Reserve launches the app for the digital dollar. So basically, you will have no privacy or control over your own money. And the danger I see in all this, as one who thinks about the next 25, 30 years, I've always been that way thinking strategically per se, the danger I see in all this is a reflection throughout what history told us over time and time, the French Revolution, the Bolshevik revolutions. In America, it looks like we are going into this direction if we are not very careful. And I tell you, something like that in America, it won't be pretty.
People are too well armed on both sides of this. I mean, armed with weapons. And to put that down, the amount of violence that the government would have to put forward is unacceptable by American standards.
Yeah, well, at the same time, you will have even law enforcement themselves saying enough is enough. We're done with this. Don't expect that even law enforcement is going to... Because law enforcement, some of them are living from paycheck to paycheck.
Yeah, they're not they're not extremely well paid.
Most likely that will be the case for them as well. And it's like, hey, what are we defending the government for? Just side with the message. That's exactly what happened with the French Revolution. Because that gap has widened so big between the have and the have-nots, to the point that people said enough is enough. The Bolshevik revolutions, yes, the Soviet Union back then with the Romanovs, political decisions were not well thought out, but also has nothing to do also with the government. It has to do also with that the people were fed up. And the same scenario I'm seeing, and I speak for myself here, and this is my opinion, the same scenario I'm seeing here in the United States. The gap in wealth is growing. It's been growing for a while. I noticed for the last 25 years, America is getting on some derail from the path they're supposed to be. And that's what concerns me the most.
I have to ask the question of both of us. How is it possible that we have 90 million poor people in the United States?
Yeah, for a wealthy nation like ours.
For a wealthy nation like ours. Yeah. That's a lot of people.
Yeah. And again, we're not advocating for the government to just do handouts. I don't believe in handouts.
That doesn't work.
It doesn't work, yeah. Because the more handouts you do, the less likely people will be motivated to work. And if you have a system like ours, capitalism that is, the bottom line is profit.
Right.
And there is nothing wrong with going after profit. The only challenge to that is when you favor one category in society over another. And when that gap becomes so wide, that's calling for trouble. That's usually where the concern. And tax system in America reflects that.
Absolutely does. You know, I'm a Vietnam era guy, and I remember the demonstrations and the limited amount of violence there was inside the country at that time. I look at this past election, and the extraordinary amount of violence that's going on. It's like the populations are being polarized, and the disenfranchised are really angry and willing to do something about it.
And that's usually the sign, Ross. Historically speaking, that's how things start. So, what we will see within the next decade, it's going to be very, very different from what you and I were accustomed to in the last 20 years.
You know, as I talk to political insiders, one of the things they say is, it's hopelessly broken, nothing can change it, and this is going to continue on just the way it is right now. What do you think of that?
Well, yes, it will continue this if nothing changes, which most likely it won't. The reason being, again, I go back to the fundamentals. And the fundamentals for all this is when you don't change the system in Congress, for example, with term limits. If you don't change that, nothing's going to change because, as you know, and I'm sure our viewers know, that the legislative body in the government is the one that's been given the authority to legislate and create laws. That is why, in addition to Congress, it has what we call the power of the purse.
Oh, yeah.
So, you can just see, if I were to be a member of Congress, which I'm not interested in, but if I were to be there, I'll be asking myself the question, Why will I want to support a legislation that will limit my power?
And the amount of money I can make.
And the amount of money I can make. You're right. And this is where part of where the problem is. Because here is the challenge to all this. A member of Congress that is going to be there forever, lobbyists understand that. But if lobbyists realize that what the term limit of that particular Congress is only 4-term, 3-term, whatever the decision is, then the lobbyist is going to start to be reduced over time. Because now I know that the next candidate in Congress might not agree to my proposal.
I think it's interesting the advice that every new congressperson receives. Toe the mark, we'll support you, and not put a candidate against you next re-election and money against you. If you do what we say, you're good. If you don't do what we say, we'll make sure you don't get another term. Going, that means any divergent thinking, any creative thinking, or anything that's really new is going to take them to a place of no power at all, go home.
Yeah. Instead of thinking of serving the interest of the constituents and say, heck with it. I think I care less for second term. I'm here to serve that term. And if the constituents wants me back, I'm going to be back and support whatever they want. Because the way we are looking at it as Americans, we are always thinking that Congress, we work for Congress. Well, it's the other way around. Congress work for us. The whole government. Because the government derives its power from the governed. From us, not the other way around.
What we've seen is the system turned upside down.
Well, because you have an uninformed, an ill-informed population. They don't understand how the system is set up because they never took time to read. We are poor readers. We don't read much in America. That's historical facts. It's just the idea of we're not willing to inform ourselves to understand where is our place in the system. Because I am too busy watching football, I am too busy watching basketball, I am too busy watching The Bachelorette and the crazy stuff on.
And every issue is complicated. And then we're inundated with talking points. Anyone who supports universal health care is a communist or a socialist. As opposed to, there are probably good ways to deal with the healthcare situation that take care of Americans that has nothing to do with being a communist.
Yeah. The same approach will apply to education. There are ways of having education that can be managed financially. Nobody has to go in debt for acquiring education. We're not saying that education should be free, completely free. I'm an educator and I don't believe in free education. Shouldn't be. Because you will have no incentive to work hard. I mean, the way I look at it, I have family members who live in France. When I was a kid, France was way up there. The last couple of years I've been going there, it's like, what happened to France? Yeah. Well, because one of the things they have is that the government pays for education. So students, I'm not saying they're bad students. All I'm saying is students will have no incentive to work hard because the argument is, well, if I fail this semester, I'll just repeat the class. It's paid for.
It comes down to a general conclusion that you and I draw so frequently. And that is, the invitation is to take a deep dive into some of these topics, especially one that you might be interested in, like term limitations, or your Congress representing you, not special interest groups. If you're distracted by talking points, you can never get an understanding because those are pure propaganda. They're there to influence you and to tell you how to think, as opposed to you thinking for yourself because you got good information. I'm delighted by YouTube, which provides a lot of quality videos that really explain situations to you. And as always,
stay informed. Till next time.